To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it. We know this worldview, the peddling of lies, that 9/11 was somehow a Jewish plot, or that the 7/7 London attacks were staged. The idea that Muslims are persecuted all over the world as a deliberate act of Western policy. The concept of an inevitable clash of civilizations. We must be clear, to defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism. For governments, there are some obvious ways we can do this. We must ban preachers of hate from coming to our countries. We must prescribe organizations that incite terrorism against people at home and abroad. We must work together to take down illegal online material like the recent videos of ISIL murdering hostages. And we must stop the so-called non-violent extremists from inciting hatred and intolerance in our schools, our universities, and yes, even our prisons. Of course, some will argue that this is not compatible with free speech and intellectual inquiry. But I ask you, would we sit back and allow right-wing extremists, Nazis or Ku Klux Klansmen to recruit on our university campuses? No. So we shouldn't stand by and just allow any form of non-violent extremism. We need to argue that prophecies of a global war of religion, pitting Muslims against the rest of the world, these things are nonsense. We need Muslims and their governments around the world to reclaim their religion from these sick terrorists, as so many are doing and quite rightly doing today. We all need help, and to help them with programs that channel young people away from these poisonous ideologues. And we need the strongest possible international focus on tackling this ideology, which is why here at the United Nations, the United Kingdom is calling for a new special representative on extremism. But fighting extremism will never be enough. Communism wasn't defeated simply by pointing out its flaws, but by showing that the alternative, economic freedoms, democracy, the rule of law, these things could build a better society and a better world. Young people need to see the power of a different, better, more open, more democratic path. The 20th century taught us the vital role of representative and accountable governments in offering their people opportunity, hope, and dignity. Of course, we should not be naive. Not every country can move at the same speed or even reach the same destination. And we should respect different cultures and traditions and histories. But let's be clear, the failure to meet people's aspirations can create a breeding ground where extremist and even terrorist insurgency can take root. Governments that only govern for some of their people cause deep resentment. In Iraq, the failure of the al-Maliki government to represent all of the people has driven some of them into the arms of extremists. Too often, people have been faced with a false choice between an autocratic and unrepresentative government on the one hand, or a brutal insurgency with religion misused as its rallying call on the other. To combat this, we must support the building blocks of free and open societies. In Iraq, this means supporting the creation of a new and genuinely inclusive government, capable of uniting all Iraqis, Sunni, Shia and Kurd, Christians and others. In Syria, it must mean a political transition and an end to Assad's brutality. Now, I know there are some who think that we should do a deal with Assad in order to defeat ISIL. But I think this view is dangerously misguided. Our enemy's enemy is not our friend, it is another enemy. Doing a deal with Assad will not defeat ISIL, because the bias and the brutality of the Assad regime was and is one of the most powerful recruiting tools for the extremists. Syria needs what Iraq needs: an inclusive, representative, democratic government that can look after the interests of all its people. So to those who have backed Assad or have stood on the sidelines, I would say this: we are ready to join with you in a new political effort to secure a representative and accountable government in Damascus that can take the fight to ISIL. But it is simply not credible for Assad to lead such a government, although we are prepared to look at every practical option to find a way forward. Third, we must be inclusive, engaging the widest possible coalition of countries in this international effort. ISIL is a threat to us all, but the greatest threat is to the region. It is very welcome that a number of Arab countries have already taken part in the action to degrade ISIL. They have shown courage and leadership. Iran should also be given the chance to show it can be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Earlier today, I met with President Rouhani. We have severe disagreements. Iran's support for terrorist organizations, its nuclear program, its treatment of its people, all these need to change. But Iran's leaders could help in defeating the threat from ISIL. They could help secure a more stable, inclusive Iraq and a more stable and inclusive Syria. And if they are prepared to do this, then we should welcome their engagement. Finally, when the safety and security of our people is at stake, we must be uncompromising in our response. That starts at home. For our part in the United Kingdom, we are introducing new powers to strengthen our ability to seize passports and stop suspects from travelling, to allow us to strip British identity from dual nationals and temporarily prevent some British nationals getting back into our country, to ensure that airlines comply with our no-fly lists and security screening requirements, and to enable our police and our security services to apply for stronger locational constraints on those in the UK who pose a risk. Here at the United Nations, we have led a Security Council resolution to disrupt the flows of finance to ISIL, to sanction those who are seeking to recruit to ISIL, and to encourage countries to do all they can to prevent foreign fighters joining the extremist cause. But what about the role of our military? I don't believe that this threat of Islamist extremism will best be solved by Western ground troops directly trying to pacify or reconstruct Middle Eastern or African countries. But pursuing an intelligent and comprehensive approach should include a place for our military. Our military can support the enormous humanitarian efforts that are necessary, as our Royal Air Force did, helping the millions of people who fled from ISIL. And we should, together, do more to build the capability of the legitimate authorities that are fighting the extremists. This can mean training, equipping, and advising, providing technology and the other assets necessary for success. Whether it is supporting action against Boko Haram in Nigeria, against Al-Shabaab in Somalia, against Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, or against Al-Qaeda in Yemen, it is right to help those who are fighting on the front line for their societies and for their countries and for their freedom. Along with our European partners, we've already been supplying equipment directly to Kurdish forces. We are strengthening the resilience of military forces in neighbouring Lebanon and Jordan. And British Tornado and surveillance aircraft have already been helping with intelligence gathering and logistics support to help those taking on ISIL in Iraq. We now have a substantial international coalition in place, including Arab nations, committed to confronting and defeating ISIL. We have a comprehensive strategy to do that, with the political, diplomatic, humanitarian and military components that it needs to succeed over time. The UN Security Council has now received a clear request from the Iraqi government to support it in its military action against ISIL. So we have a clear basis in international law for action, and we have a need to act in our own national interest to protect our people and our society. So it is right that Britain should now move to a new phase of action. I am therefore recalling the British Parliament on Friday to secure approval for the United Kingdom to take part in international airstrikes against ISIL in Iraq. My message today is simple. We are facing an evil against which the whole of the world should unite. And as ever, in the cause of freedom, democracy and justice, Britain will play its part. Thank you.